Let's get started. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Matt Cooper with Academic Analytics, Strategic Engagement Manager here. I'm joined by Chelsea Bassett, Senior Product Manager for the Alumni Project here. It's not that long ago in institutional memory that colleges and universities could simply say, trust us for demonstrating the impact of workforce development. We're not in that world today. I know many of you feel that in your portfolios, in your roles every day. And regardless of your institutional position, of your mission, of your size, of your new U.S. News and World Report ranking, demonstrating the impact of workforce development and really how we impact our communities that we serve is more important than it has ever been. I think the good news is that the good work continues. We have been doing workforce development as a sector well for a long time. It's the demonstration of its impact on key communities that has been lagging. And today we're going to show you some great examples of how this works in practice, institutions across the country that are doing this particularly well. Before we get started, I have a question for you. And I wanted, for those of you who have not yet put in a chat question, pull up your chat. Zoom just did a reorganization here. For me, it's on the right-hand side. If you click on chat, you can put in a question. What I'd like to know is, why are you here today? What drove you to attend this webinar? What's on your mind that when you come out of this webinar, if you've learned something or picked up a new idea, what would that be that would make it worth your time? Take a moment and do that, if you would. If you happen to be driving or taking this webinar in on your way to work, don't do that. Do it later. But if you're not, I really appreciate your feedback here. Okay, thank you. See many items pouring in here. Okay, Chelsea, let's advance to the next slide here. Most of your institutions use academic analytics in some form, but some of you do not. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of academic analytics, and then we're going to go right into the workforce development topic today. So what is academic analytics? It's a source of business intelligence and information for university leaders that brings different pillars of your academic and research enterprise in one place. Focus on the left here for research excellence, thinking about the comparative context for strategic planning. Where are we strong? Where do we have vulnerabilities? Where do we have faculty who we need to be sure and retain to maintain excellence in particular fields? Being able to benchmark research excellence and have a clear view of where you stand among peers and your strengths and vulnerabilities as you move forward as an institution is critically important. This has been the core mission of academic analytics for the last 20 years. Many of you are familiar with this. From that, we've grown into three new areas. The second here is faculty growth and development, helping an individual faculty member reduce the administrative burden of their faculty life, spending less time putting data into systems, filling out a promotion and tenure dossier, filling out annual review, and spending more time using that information meaningfully. I've seen some great examples on the ground of faculty who are now able to meaningfully advance their careers and plan their careers using that information and spending less time dealing with the administrative overhead of getting it in. It's having a huge impact on institutions, particularly as there are hiring freezes at many institutions. So retention, making sure that faculty are served well, making sure that you can reduce their administrative burden is more important than it has ever been. We've been focusing the last few years on economic development and demonstrating to industry partners, similar to how we'll demonstrate workforce development today, but demonstrating the university's strength to those key industry partners. And more importantly, finding the industry partners out there that are looking for a partner that are the right fit for your unique faculty expertise. Every university and college has its own mix of expertise across faculty. And that means that not every industry partner is the right fit. And it's critically important to find the right partners and not just a partner, and having good systematic ways to do that having a big impact in economic development roles. Lastly, and this is where we'll focus today, is workforce development, demonstrating after people graduate from your college or university, where do they go? What do they do? What communities do they impact? How are they progressing through leadership positions in their careers? And how does that all compare to peers? How can we see where we excel, where we might lag? This plays into curricular development, training for students, advising. I just spoke to a career services office yesterday. It's using this to demonstrate to students as they imagine their own career. What career might I lead? Who's out there who might be a good mentor for me? who could be a kind of model for my own career to imagine the great breadth and diversity that comes from any degree program. Or you might ask the reverse question. Say, if you're a student and your goal is to find yourself in career X, what are the pathways that lead to that career? It's a very important question. Having data-driven advising in this sense is really picking up the last few years, this year in particular. But the reason we're here today is to demonstrate from the college and university's perspective, what is our impact on key communities across our local community, our region, our state, our global impact as people move across the world and picked up skills, picked up experience, picked up an education at your institution, and what are they doing with it today? It's more important than it has ever been. So Chelsea, now let me turn this over to you and give us a sense how workforce development is playing out and some good examples from across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. So hopefully you're joined. Obviously, Matt talked a lot about it. This is really about demonstrating impact. So let's just start there. And I think this is really important to sort of just key in on what it is that we're actually talking about. So how do we demonstrate impact? So this reminds me, I spent 15 years working in higher education, particularly around student success. And of course, it did not matter what institution I was at, what committee I was sitting on, what subcommittee I was sitting on. We'd eventually come back to this idea. Well, how are we defining what student success is? And, we would throw out all sorts of metrics, persistence rates. Did the student study abroad? Did they have an internship, completion rates. But as we know, we've seen a huge shift in student success really being defined by outcomes. And I was vindicated, right? Yesterday, I was attending the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Their annual virtual conference is going on right now. And you might be familiar with the Strata Foundation, but they released a report that's talking about success beyond completion rates. And so it's not just about did you get them across the stage? We're really put in a position to ensure that those students have fruitful, successful lives after graduation as well. So that's what we're really going to talk about today in creating that impact. So how do institutions do this? I have this small graphic up here. This is not rocket science, but from an educational standpoint, we create impact by creating opportunities for students to go out in their communities and have impact there. And so, of course, an institution offers academic programs. Those lead to some type of real world outcome. Hopefully you're thinking about that or tracking that in some way, and we're going to really focus on that today. You use those outcomes then to do some kind of assessment and program review. That could be curriculum review, could be co-curricular activities as well, right? You use that information. Are you teaching the right things? Are you holding your students to the right standards? You make those tweaks, then you offer those programs again, right? And there's a cycle that happens. This is really how institutions create impact or create those opportunities for students. And more importantly, what we're going to focus on today is specifically those real world outcomes. You can't have this little triangle successfully without ensuring you understand the holistic viewpoint of where your students are actually going after graduation. So before we kind of dive into what academic analytics does to support these efforts, Matt, I was wondering, in your experience, can you talk a little bit about, the challenges that institutions have seen in trying to collect this information?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chelsea. So a lot of you here today have been doing this in some form for a long time and doing it well. The challenge we've seen, four challenges primarily, is that first, getting actual data here and keeping it up to date. Keeping it up to date is really important, knowing not what somebody was doing 3 years ago, but what they're doing today. That's time consuming. And I spoke with an institution when we first started this project. Their solution was to hire undergraduates over the summer to go do data collection. And at first that worked well enough. And then once you start to add up the costs and the inefficiencies of that process, you need someone to manage that team. You need infrastructure. Different people might code different things different ways. If you look at a job, you have three undergraduates look at a particular job and ask them to code. What kind of job is that? What kind of industry is that? You get three different answers. And so having a consistent way to keep that data up to date yourself, especially as our alumni populations that we're tracking have expanded, has become very time consuming and expensive. Some institutions use surveys for this. I speak regularly with institutions that have great survey responses in the early years after graduation, particularly the first year. I spoke with an institution just yesterday that had approaching 90% of a response rate, in part because they forced them to do it, or else you couldn't fulfill the full graduation requirements. You know, it's a valid thing to do. But then after they progress into the careers, when you really want to know what they're doing as they get into more substantial positions and progress through leadership in their career, survey responses plummet. I'm sure you've all seen this in your institutions. Other providers out there that I've seen mostly are algorithm driven. What does that mean? It means that you give them a name, an algorithm runs a test, spits back some data, and it's on you to figure out, is that actually the right person and what's the quality of that data? If you're doing nothing but painting a very high level picture, that can be good enough. It's an inexpensive, cheap response that works sometimes. If your goal is to have data about actual people that's high quality and up to date, algorithms alone are not enough. They can get close, but what we found and what we'll demonstrate today is that the human difference there to have an actual disciplinary expert go through and say, does it make sense that this Matt Cooper is this Matthew Cooper who's now employed at X? A person has to actually look at that and validate, yes, that makes sense, validate it ideally with three sources, and then return high quality data to you. I often hear that, well, we don't need this kind of data because advancement and alumni relations do a pretty good job at keeping up with alumni. When you really dig into that question, what I found, I'm curious what you found, respond to me here in the chat if you can, is that advancement and alumni relations are very good at keeping up with a subset of people, particularly those people who are in a position in their careers to have a level of wealth or engagement to give back to the institution. And I speak all the time with academic leaders in particular who say, that's great. I need to know about those people and my advancement does a great job. But I really want to know about the people at the career stage right before that, say 3 to 7 years out, to begin developing relationships with them and to demonstrate as they move through their careers, what's their impact on our economy, on our community, on our state and our region. And I've consistently found that advancement and alumni relations are not that good at keeping up with people that early in their career. And so you need a good, validated, person level solution to get that data and to keep it up to date.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. And I'm, just going to add something quickly to that advancement and alumni relations piece. Matt and I speak with a lot of different individuals, but especially if you work with graduate students, we've gotten a lot of feedback that alumni relations is great at tracking undergraduates, those high flyers, because there's such an affinity there, right? Usually students who went to their undergraduate education, that affinity is a little different for that school than where they attended grad school. So sometimes grad populations are sort of this forgotten population of individuals that also still should be evaluated, still should be tracked.
It's a great point, Chesley. We're getting several responses here in the chat about postdocs too. And that I'm sure you all know from your own roles, that's become a really important population in the last few years, but routinely universities and colleges are pretty bad at keeping up with their outcomes. They don't fall cleanly into any category of student or employee or trainee, but university invests a lot in their training. And as they go through and move through the professional, scientific, academic workforce, wherever they're going, they have a huge impact too. Back to you, Chelsea.
Exactly. All right, so let's start with the basic question. What are our alumni doing? I have a feeling you've probably asked this question, or maybe have been asked this question. Might be department chairs, career services, alumni offices, deans, presidents. This is extremely important. And as Matt mentioned in the beginning, I think there has never been such a spotlight on higher education to be able to show where their graduates are going, not just undergraduates, on every single level of degrees. So what are our alumni doing? So before we get into what academic analytics essentially provides to you, I want to speak very briefly about the process. Matt talked a little bit about these algorithmic data providers, and we work differently. He alluded to the fact, that we have a human verifying all this information. So just a really quick rundown of the process. You would actually provide us a list, call it a roster, of the alumni that you would want us to identify. So maybe you are only focused on bachelor students, or you're only focused on postdocs. I know that has come up. Typically, institutions would like to track a window, if you will. So you might say, we need 10 years worth of data. Matt mentioned earlier first destination surveys. We spoke with that school who's getting some ways 90% response rate, but after first destination, they really have no idea where their students are going after that. And I think all of us know it is extremely rare for a student to have their forever job the first job out of college. We know that's not the case. So it's so important to track, 3 years out, 5 years, 10 years, even sometimes beyond that. So you would actually set that window, typically about 10 years, send us that roster, and we go out and find them. We use humans. Humans verify every single individual that you send us, and then we return those results back to you. And today we're really going to focus on the visuals that academic analytics provides back. But I want to mention we also provide, which is very unusual, the individual data, and it is mapped back to the individual alum. And this is so important. Earlier in that sort of triangle graphic, we talked about assessment, program evaluation. Those things are really hard to do if you're not identifying person level data. You're probably tracking a huge number of metrics right now. GPAs, Dean's List, completion rates, persistence, Pell eligibility, financial aid, demographic information, student activities, all of that stuff. That's typically mapped to a student ID. We will provide that outcomes data also mapped to that same identifier, which means not only can you start looking at things like persistence and graduation amongst those other metrics. But now you can map those outcomes data to all the different curricular and co-curricular things that you're tracking at your institution. That's an extremely, extremely powerful thing. So it's not just about, hey, did these things help the student walk the stage? Which of these students are landing the right types of careers that they hoped for when they started college? And what did they do differently? How can we tweak our programs for that? So I think that's really important to note that we do provide that raw data back to you as well. So let's jump into sort of the visuals. So what are our alumni doing? We'll provide just some really big overview, what we call them top five, top job titles, top locations, etc., top employers. Are there trends where your students are naturally going, or is there somebody out there, they really love to hire your students? That's important to know. We also will provide back to you industries. So here's some broader industries, academia, for profit, and we also get more specific. These are the North American Industry Classification System industries. But Matt alluded to this a little bit earlier. The classification of things is very difficult and almost more time consuming than finding the individual themselves. So let's say you are fortunate enough to have a couple graduate students or some interns who are going out and trying to find alums for your program. An example, let's say they're trying to find 500 individuals. And by all means, they found 500 students. But now chances are you have a list of over 450 different employers, different job titles, different locations. That can be really messy data to deal with. And so the classification of employers and job titles into sort of accepted taxonomies is really important to help make this data useful for you. If you're constantly looking through this giant list of thousands of employers, right? What does that really provide you? Rather, sometimes you need to place those into buckets that make meaningful sense. So we actually classify all employers into 3 different taxonomies. So here I'm showing the North American Industry Classification System. We also use Audi, the Association of American Universities Data Exchange, and CNGLS, the Coalition for Next Generation Life Sciences. That last one might not be super helpful depending on the program that you're in, but some of our clients have asked for that. But we do this classification for you. And once again, it helps make that data more meaningful so you can draw some different connections that way. All right, and then we also will provide some estimated salaries. And big bold at the top, this is estimated. It's very, very difficult to find actual salaries of individuals, not to mention that's extremely, extremely private information. And so rather, we use job title, and then we triangulate that with location. Where is that individual working? And then we use data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics to spit out essentially an estimated salary. Location's really important to note here. we all know cost of living differs wildly across the country, as do salaries. So, for example, someone working in the Bay Area is going to be making very different salaries than someone, I'll use my hometown, for example, Beaver Crossing, Nebraska. And bonus points if anybody has ever even heard of that. Very, very different types of places. So even in a similar job, the salaries are going to be wildly different. So that's why location is really important for us to track with these salaries as well. All right, speaking of location, we talk about impact. You can't really demonstrate impact without knowing the where. Where are your students having impact? Are they staying in your community? Are they staying in your state? Where are they going post-graduation when it becomes a little bit more difficult to track them? So we provide a lot of geographic information for you as well. So maps, I feel like everyone loves maps. So we provide this, and all of these are actually interactive. So these little bubbles that you see in the state, they allow you to zoom in to a state, and we map location down to zip code if we can find the zip code for the individual. And so those little bubbles within the state, those are all representative of alums at that zip code, just kind of why they're scattered throughout those different states there. So, what is the value of location data? I'm sure several of you can think of a million reasons of how you would use this or ways that you would use this. Of course, we keep talking about demonstrating value. So, particularly demonstrating the economic value and economic impact. When alums stay in the area, those are creating jobs for future graduates. They are paying taxes. They're spending money in the area. That's economic impact. That's huge. Also, those next two bullet points, I'll kind of button those up together a little bit. I'm sure this is perhaps happening more lately than it has in perhaps years past, but a lot of conversations happening with lobbyists and legislators regarding policy, regarding procedures. That's all happening right now across the country. So this geographic data can be really important in those conversations. And so I'll use perhaps a less controversial example, but I was speaking with a dean of a very large public institution a while ago, and they were using this location data because they had an inkling their talent, their graduates were actually leaving the area, leaving the state after they graduated. And they had the data to prove this. That opened up a very different type of conversation about also what's the partnership like with your local, regional, and state governments of it's not a great thing if you're spending all this money to educate your talent pool in the state and then they all happen to leave because they don't see the economic advancement opportunities regionally where they're located. Those are very hard conversations, but super important to be having right now. And you can't
Chelsea,
have those
just
if
one
you
note
don't
on
have good
this.
data to back that up. What?
I had a great experience a few weeks ago. I went to a workforce development conference that a university hosted. It was a roundtable for their state and brought together academic and research leaders from their university, local business leaders, and policymakers from the state assembly. And they'd done this several years. And that conversation had typically existed in a kind of data-free vacuum, where everybody's saying, we believe we're doing this, and the business community would say, we really need this, and the policy community would say, we really want you to be doing this. And there's no data. And this was the first year where they had exactly these graphs and a few over the next few slides that Chelsea will show you. And they were able to demonstrate this is where our people go. They could point to people in the room and say, CEO of company X, we 11 people from this particular program have gone to your company the last 3 years. Are they good employees? What do you like about them? What could we do better? And it sharpened that conversation so much. And it was extremely productive conversation and a great demonstration of what real data can bring to those conversations.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a great example. And just quickly, that last bullet point there, mission fulfillment, especially if you're at a public institution, it's written in your charter essentially to serve your local area, to serve your state. And once again, this proves that you are doing that and for the individuals in your area. All right, we don't just stop there though at state data, zip codes, or domestic data. We also will track students if they happen to leave the country. Global impact is also really important. So Matt, sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot again. But in your experience, what have you seen with institutions and how they're using global data that we're able to provide to them through this process?
So many good examples. I mean, I talked to an institution, a religious institution that had a religious mission, and their goal was to say, in our domain, we are a global leader. They believe it. They've seen local evidence that it's true. They had not really had data on the global pipeline of talent that they produce to demonstrate whether we are and to what extent. And using this was the first time they were able to demonstrate to their stakeholders, not only are we impacting our community and fulfilling our mission, but we really are in our domain a global leader producing talent in our domain. It's very powerful. I've seen a lot of examples too to use this. You know, Chelsea, you mentioned from a dean's perspective. I've spoken with several deans who say, "I'm organizing a trip to London last minute, and Advancement has a few high-profile donors they want me to meet with. I'd kind of like to know some people earlier in their career who I can begin to develop a relationship with, where even if they're not giving back to the university yet, they might be a great mentor. They might sit on a panel that we host to talk about the great things that people go on to do after they leave the university. Historically, they'd not had visibility into those people. And this is literally one click. Pull up that place, see who's there, see what they're doing, and who you want to connect with.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so location data, got a check mark there. So now we're going to move to something that is so important to me. I mentioned, I spent a lot of time in higher education and a lot of work with students, in advising. I was a director of advising. I was an assistant dean for student success, did a lot of career work. We can't understate this. Advisors, career coaches, faculty mentors, advisors, they're on the front line of working with students. And I'm going to share something. Someone shared this with me a long time ago, and it's always resonated with me. Students, they can only become what they see. And this was particularly shared with me because did a lot of work with first generation. Growing up in Beaver Crossing, Nebraska, there was a very limited idea of what it meant to be successful. You can't become something if you don't know that it exists. So we've worked really hard on showing these career pathways. Matt mentioned this earlier as well. Whether you put this in the hands of students, your advisors, your career coaches, we actually can show here are programs on the left, here are the industries they map to, the job titles that they was mapped to, and just quick showing here, you can go forwards and backwards. You can interact with these things. Liberal arts, there's a lot of proving the value of a liberal arts degree. What are all the different careers that a liberal arts major will do for you? And then you also can go in reverse. You've got how many students, show up, they want to be pre-med. So what are all the different pathways that say they don't want to major in a hard science? Here are all the different ways that alums before you have done this. All right. And then, as we're wrapping up here a little bit, there's just a final thing I want to talk about. Going kind of back to that original graphic we talked about, that cycle of how we're demonstrating impact here. There's still sometimes a tough way to bridge this gap. We have curriculum, and then we have the real world demand or these real world outcomes. And in a lot of ways, people don't think those are related. Faculty are experts, they're teaching specific curriculum, and then you have this job. You might have worked with students, they bring a job description to you and they're thinking, I can't do this, or better, I don't know what this job does, right? So how are we bridging that gap? It's really through skills, employable skills, transferable skills, whatever you want to call them, competencies. It's all talking about that same thing. How do we bridge the gap between what students are learning in their college education versus what the demand is out there for industry? So in the last minute or so we have here, just wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming. Is we have been evaluating job descriptions and job postings from across the country and pulling out the requirements for those jobs. So this is real data that we've been evaluating. This is just a mock here, but we can have a job title, and then we're pulling all the things that are in demand. What does it mean if you want to be a project management specialist? What skills do you need? And I think it's important, since we've been looking at those job postings, we're actually mapping those industry skills, right? I'll call it industry lingo, industry speak, and placing those into more higher education competencies. So I mentioned NACE earlier. They have very popular competencies that they publish every year. So how can we help your advisors, career coaches, students essentially translate, right? This is what's in demand. this is actually what they're looking for. These are the skills that you're learning every single day in your curriculum, your co-curriculum efforts. And so it helps, like I said, bridge that gap between that entire process of going out and making sure that they have good outcomes and they're able to achieve their goals after graduation. And so we are exactly at 10:30. I do think we are willing to stay on, obviously, if you have any questions or comments here. And I'm going to actually turn this over to Matt to talk about what's coming up and if we have any questions that we'd like to address. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. It's a wealth of good information, and it's really encouraging, I think, to see examples about how other institutions are approaching this. And I hope that each of you have taken away an idea, an approach, a new question that you might ask, and would love to work with you on these questions. Let me say about a little about what will come next. Over the summer, many of you at public universities might be attending some of these summer meetings, from economic development to faculty affairs to academic affairs. If you're going to one of these summer meetings, we'd love to meet with you there. We're hosting an event at each. You would be welcome, and I'd love to get your feedback there. If you have an interest in economic development, many of your portfolios also span that area. We have a webinar coming up on August 19th about driving economic development, leveraging your unique faculty talent. That was important before. In this era of higher education, extremely important to be able to not only do it, but to demonstrate it. We're going to have some great examples there. We have many questions come in through the chat that we were not able to fully address. So what will come next is, if that's the case, we'll send you a message. And if you're willing, I'd love to spend a little time with you to figure out what you need from this going forward. These solutions have been built by the academic community over the last 20 years, and they are only as good as your input, and we need to know what you need. So look out for a message from us over the next day. Thank you all very much. I hope your summer is lovely. I hope you have a little bit of time to rest and renew. We need your work more than ever as a higher education sector. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for your time today.